I was 26 when this happened. I just finished a late shift at a distribution warehouse outside Knoxville and had a 90-minute drive home on E40. It was a Tuesday in November, close to midnight, and I was the only car on that stretch of highway for what felt like miles in either direction. The first thing I noticed was the headlights. Not that there were headlights behind me, that's normal on any highway, but that they'd been sitting at the exact same distance back for about 20 minutes without getting closer or falling away. I told myself it was probably just someone else driving home from a late shift, someone who happened to live in the same direction and drove the same speed as me. That's a completely ordinary thing. Two cars on the same highway going the same direction at the same speed happens constantly, and I do it all the time without ever thinking anything of it. So I adjusted my seat, put on a podcast, and stopped watching my mirrors as closely as I had been for the past few minutes. I noticed the headlights again, somewhere around mile marker 38. They were still there, still that same fixed distance back, and something about it felt different from before. Not because anything had changed, but because nothing had. In 25 minutes of driving, that distance hadn't adjusted at all, not even slightly. I'd changed lanes twice to pass slower trucks, and both times I watched the headlights shift over as well, then settle back into the same position behind me, like they were attached to my car by an invisible cord. I tried to think about it rationally, and I came up with a reasonable answer pretty quickly. Adaptive cruise control. Some newer cars have a feature where the cruise control locks onto the vehicle in front of it and just follows at a set interval automatically. That was probably it. Someone put their cruise on, and my taillights happened to be what their system latched onto. I actually felt a little relieved once I thought of that, which says a lot about how hard your brain will work to find the explanation that lets you relax. I sped up anyway, not dramatically. Just took my cruise control from 72 up to 78 and held it there. Within about 2 minutes, the headlights had closed the distance and settled back in behind me at the same position. Still the same gap, still the same steady presence. I don't remember exactly when my stomach went cold, but it was somewhere around then, somewhere in those 2 minutes of watching my mirror and doing the math on what I was seeing. I told myself it was still the adaptive cruise thing, that whoever was back there had just adjusted their own speed and their system had recalibrated, that this was all completely mechanical and had nothing to do with me specifically. I kept telling myself that for the next several miles while the podcast kept playing and the highway kept unrolling ahead of me and the headlights kept sitting there in my mirror like they'd been painted on the glass. There was a rest stop about 12 miles ahead, and I made a decision. I'd pull in, use the restroom, get a coffee from the vending machine, and let whoever was behind me pass. Then I'd know. If they drove past the exit and kept going, I'd feel stupid for 10 minutes, and then I'd move on with my life. I'd been on the road for over 40 minutes by then anyway, and I genuinely needed to stop. I slowed as I approached the exit ramp and watched my mirrors carefully. The headlights slowed too. I took the exit. The headlights followed me off the highway, down the ramp, and into the rest stop parking lot. They pulled to a stop at the far edge of the lot near the entrance road, where the pavement met the grass, and sat there, with the engine running, and the headlights aimed directly across the lot at my car. I did not get out. I left my engine running, and my doors locked, and I sat there, in my seat trying to be calm and logical about what I was actually looking at. It was a public rest stop. People stopped at rest stops all the time, at all hours, for all kinds of ordinary reasons. Maybe this person always parked at the edge of the lot. Maybe they'd pulled over to take a phone call and just happened to park facing my direction. Maybe the whole thing was a series of coincidences that I was stitching together into a pattern because it was midnight and I was alone and tired. And the human brain is a pattern-finding machine, even when the pattern isn't real. I tried to hold on to that. I kept building the argument for coincidence because the alternative, that someone had been deliberately following me for over 40 minutes, was not something I was ready to accept yet. Part of me still thought I was probably overthinking it, The car didn't move. Nobody got out. The headlights kept pointing at me across the dark parking lot. And after about 3 minutes of sitting there, I pulled out of my space and headed back toward the highway entrance. The car followed me. Not fast, not aggressive, not like a chase, just steady and calm and patient, letting me get back up to highway speed and then settling in behind me at that exact same distance, like nothing had happened between us, like we hadn't just sat in a rest stop parking lot at midnight facing each other through 70 feet of dark. That patience was the worst part. Whatever this was, it wasn't impulsive. It wasn't random. Something had decided to be there and was comfortable taking its time about it. I called 911. I told the dispatcher I'd had a vehicle following me for close to 45 minutes on I-40 eastbound, that they'd followed me into a rest stop and back out, and that I was alone on the highway with about 50 minutes left on my drive. She told me to stay on the line, keep moving toward the nearest populated area, and that she was going to alert the county. I described the car as best I could from my mirror. Dark-colored, maybe a sedan. Couldn't make out the plates from that distance. She stayed on the call with me. I don't remember exactly what we talked about during the stretches where nothing was happening, but I remember the steadiness of her voice and how much it helped to hear it. I kept my speed at 75 and watched the headlights in my mirror and gave updates every few minutes when there was something to say. Somewhere past the Cookville exit, the headlights went off. Not an exit. There was no exit right there. Not a turn. They were there, and then they weren't. Like someone had reached over and cut the lights on a moving car traveling at highway speed in the pitch dark, which is not something you do by accident and is not something you do if your intentions are normal. The dispatcher noted it. She told me to keep driving and stay on the line a little longer. I did. I drove the rest of the way home without seeing them again. No exits, no overpasses, no on-ramps between where the lights vanished and the next interchange. Just highway. I still don't know where they went or how they did it. The dispatcher gave me a case number before I hung up. I called back the next morning and was told there was nothing further to report. No vehicle had been stopped. No plates had been identified. No other calls had come in about the same car that night. The case was open and sitting there with nothing attached to it. I've driven that same route many times since then, and I always check my mirrors now, without meaning to, the way you check a lock you've already turned. Sometimes at night, on a long, empty stretch of I-40, I'll catch a set of headlights that seems to be staying at a consistent distance, and my whole body goes tight before I can talk myself down. It passes, but it never takes very long to arrive. I think about the patience of it most. The way someone can sit behind you in the dark for 45 minutes and never close the distance, and never rush, and never do anything you can point to directly. Just stay right there, present and steady, close enough that you know they're there, and far enough away that you can almost convince yourself they aren't. I never found out what they were waiting for. I'm not sure I want to know. My name is Carla. I was 31 at the time. I'd spent the afternoon at my sister's farmhouse in rural Ohio and was driving home on Route 30 when my tire pressure light came on, somewhere past a grain elevator with no lights on and a shuttered feed store next to it. The stretch between her town and mine is about 60 miles of two-lane road, and I'd driven it my whole life, so I wasn't scared when the light came on, just annoyed. I pulled onto a wide gravel shoulder just past the elevator, put my hazards on, and got out to look. The front passenger tire was visibly low, not flat, but soft enough that I wasn't going to push my luck for 60 miles on a cold January night. I had a small 12-volt pump in my trunk that runs off the cigarette lighter, and I'd used it before, so I got it out, got it plugged in and running, and stood next to my car with my hands stuffed in my coat pockets, watching my breath cloud and disappear in front of me. The road was completely empty in both directions. The grain elevator blocked whatever ambient light might have come from the west, and the sky was overcast enough that there were no stars. The only light was my hazards, blinking orange across the gravel. That's when the pickup truck slowed down. He didn't stop, not that first time. He came from the direction I'd been driving, slowed almost to a complete stop alongside me, and looked at me from his window for a moment. I looked back at him. He was alone in the cab. I couldn't make out much detail in the dark except that he was older, heavy-set, wearing a hat. Then he rolled on and kept going, and his taillights disappeared around a long curve, about a quarter mile up the road. I told myself it was a decent person doing a decent thing. Slowing down to check on a woman pulled over alone at night, I would do that. Most people would do that. The fact that he kept going after looking meant he could see I had the pump out and was handling it, and that was that. I went back to watching the pressure gauge and listening to the pump rattle against the side of my car. He came back. I don't know exactly how long it had been, maybe 7 minutes, maybe a little more, but I saw headlights coming from the direction he'd gone, moving slowly, and they pulled off the road about 30 feet behind my car and stopped. I heard the truck door open. I want to be honest about something. I didn't turn around right away. I stood there facing my tire for a few seconds before I turned, and I've thought about that a lot since. I think part of me already knew that turning around meant having to make a decision, and I wasn't ready yet, so I gave myself a few extra seconds of not knowing. I told myself he was just a neighbor who lived on one of those rural routes nearby and had come back because he genuinely wanted to help. I told myself people do that. I kept telling myself that even as I heard his footsteps on the gravel getting closer, he was already about 15 feet away when I turned, older than I'd guessed from the truck, maybe 60, maybe more, in a heavy Carhartt jacket, with his hands loose at his sides and a completely neutral expression on his face. He said he'd noticed I was pulled over and wanted to see if I needed any help. Perfectly normal sentence, reasonable tone, friendly even. I told him I had a pump and was almost done, that I appreciated him stopping, but I was fine. He said okay, and then he stayed. He didn't walk back to his truck. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there on the gravel shoulder in the dark, watching me finish pumping my tire. And I understood somewhere in the back of my mind that his staying was the problem, not his stopping. Someone who comes back because they're worried, asks once if you need help, and then goes when you say you're fine. That's what concern looks like. What I was looking at didn't look like concern. It looked like someone who had decided to be there and wasn't in any hurry to leave. I kept my voice completely even. I'm proud of that, actually, because I didn't feel even. I asked him if he lived nearby, just to say something, and he said he knew the area. That's all he said. Not yes, not a town name, not a road, just that he knew the area, which doesn't answer the question at all, but sounds like it does, if you're not paying attention. I told him my pump had finished and I needed to get going. He nodded slowly and took another step or two toward the front of my car. Not toward me, exactly, more toward the car itself, and looked at it the way you look at something you're thinking about. Then he said it was a long road to be on alone at night. Not like a warning, not aggressive, just quiet and flat, like he was sharing an observation he'd given some thought to, like he'd stood on this particular stretch of road on other particular nights and arrived at the same conclusion. I got in my car. I didn't check the pressure reading. I didn't pull the pump cord from the socket properly. I just yanked it free and tossed it on the passenger seat. I got in, locked both doors, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road without looking at him again. I watched my mirror. He was still standing there next to where my car had been, in the orange wash of my taillights, watching me drive away. He didn't move toward his truck. He didn't move at all. Just stood there in the dark on the shoulder of an empty highway watching my car until I went around the long curve and lost sight of him. I called my sister from the road once I had enough signal. I told her what had happened, walking her through the whole thing, the first pass, the coming back, the standing there, the way he'd said it. She wanted me to call the police. I didn't know what to tell them. A man had stopped to offer help, and then stood on a public road, neither of which is a crime. I hadn't been touched, hadn't been threatened, hadn't been followed as far as I could tell. I'd checked my mirrors the whole way to the next town and never saw his headlights behind me. I still don't know if that means he stayed there or just that he turned off before I'd notice. I'm not sure which one of those is the better answer. I've run the whole encounter back in my mind more times than I can count since that January night. I can build a version of it where he was just a socially awkward man who didn't read cues well, who genuinely wanted to help and didn't understand why a woman alone at night might not want a stranger standing over her on an empty road. That version exists. It's possible. I can also build the other version, where someone drove past a woman alone on a dark highway, made a decision, circled back, and stood next to her car waiting to see what she would do. Both versions end the same way. Me getting in my car and leaving. And I guess that's the version that matters. But the versions don't feel the same when I think about them at 2 a.m. One of them is a misunderstanding. The other one is something I got away from. I take I-76 now when I visit my sister, even though it adds 25 minutes each way. She thinks I'm being dramatic about it. I don't argue with her because I can't prove anything, and I know how the story sounds when I tell it out loud. A man pulled over, offered help, stood on the shoulder, said one slightly odd sentence, and I drove away. That's the whole story. Nothing happened, except that I haven't been able to stop thinking about the way he looked at my car. Not at me, at the car, like he was thinking about something. And I think about what he said, that it was a long road to be on alone at night. And I think about the fact that he'd already driven past me and already seen that I was alone before he turned around and came back. He knew before he stopped. That sentence wasn't an observation. It was something else, and I still haven't found the right word for what it was. And I don't think I'm going to. This happened 3 years ago on Highway 287 in West Texas. I'd been driving since early afternoon, and the sun went down somewhere east of Fort Stockton. I still had 4 hours left to Lubbock, and there was nothing out there. And I mean that in the most literal way possible. No towns, no gas stations with their orange glow, no radio signal worth keeping, just flat scrubland stretching out in every direction, and my headlights cutting a small, pale corridor through the dark in front of me, while the rest of the world ceased to exist. The first time I saw the car, it was stopped on the opposite shoulder, facing my direction with its headlights off. I passed it at about 70 miles an hour, so I only had it in my vision for 2 or 3 seconds. But I registered it. Old model, boxy shape, maybe early 90s. American make, light-colored. The driver's door was hanging open. I told myself someone had pulled over to use the bathroom on the side of the road, which happens all the time on a stretch of highway this remote and this long. There are no exits, no facilities, no options, and people make do. I'd done it myself twice earlier that day. I kept my speed and kept driving, and within about 30 seconds, the car was gone from my mirrors, and I'd more or less stopped thinking about it. 8 miles later, I saw it again, or something that looked exactly like it. Same boxy profile, same light color, same door hanging open on the driver's side, parked on the opposite shoulder facing my direction with no lights on. I slowed down as I passed this time, dropping maybe 15 miles an hour, and looked as carefully as I could in the 2 or 3 seconds I had. Nobody visible in the front seat. Nobody standing near the car on either side. No shape anywhere near it in the dark. I kept going, and I spent the next couple of miles building the logical case. 2 broken down cars of similar make and color in 8 miles on a rural Texas highway was unusual, but not mathematically impossible. It was dark, and I'd been driving for close to 6 hours, and tired eyes fill in details they haven't actually seen, and assign familiarity to things that only resemble each other. I hadn't gotten a clear look at either car. I told myself I was pattern matching on incomplete information, which is something exhausted human brains do constantly on long drives, and I turned the radio scan on and let it search for a signal and tried to move on. I saw it a third time, same distance between sightings. roughly 8 miles, roughly the same stretch of empty two-lane, same shoulder, same open door, same absence of any person anywhere near it. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded at the time, sitting in my car on a dark Texas highway at 10 o'clock at night. I know the math on it. I understand that for the car to appear 8 miles ahead of me each time, it would have to be moving between my sidings, moving fast, moving without lights on a two-lane road with no parallel routes and no crossroads I'd seen. And I understood that wasn't possible, or at least that it required a set of circumstances so specific and deliberate that accepting them meant accepting something I genuinely did not want to accept. So I pulled over. I don't know exactly why I stopped. I've asked myself that question many times since, and I think the honest answer is that the uncertainty had become worse than whatever I might find out by stopping. I needed to know whether I was losing my mind or whether something real was happening on that road. Because floating between those two options while driving alone through the Texas dark was not something I could keep doing for another 4 hours. I pulled onto the shoulder and left my engine running and sat there with my hazards on, looking across at the car from about 40 feet away through my windshield. My headlights lit it up clearly enough. Old boxy sedan, no question. Could have been a Buick or an Oldsmobile from the late 80s, light gray or maybe white, dusty the way everything out there is dusty. Driver's door open at about a 45-degree angle. Interior dark. Nothing on the road around it in either direction as far as my headlights reached. Nothing moved. I sat there for what I think was close to 2 full minutes watching. No wind strong enough to move the door. No sound I could identify over my own engine. No shape coming out of the dark from either the roadside or the scrubland side. I took out my phone and photographed it through my windshield. I remember my hands being steadier than I expected them to be, which I think was shock more than calm. And then I sat for another 30 seconds or so, and then I pulled back onto the highway and drove. I don't remember exactly what I was thinking in those first few miles after I left. I think I wasn't thinking in words at all. I think my brain had shifted into something quieter and more animal than thought, something that was just moving me forward and keeping my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road ahead. I tried to reconstruct a rational explanation over the next hour of driving, and I kept coming back to the same problem, which was the distance. 8 miles each time, consistent enough to be a measurement, not a coincidence. For something to be 8 miles ahead of me each time I saw it, it had to know roughly how fast I was going and position itself accordingly, which meant it was either following my speed from in front of me, without lights on a 2-lane highway at night, or there were multiple cars staged at intervals, which required coordination and purpose and raised a different set of questions I liked even less. I tried the coincidence explanation one more time, and I couldn't make it fit anymore. 3 times is not coincidence. 2 times is coincidence. 3 times is a pattern, and a pattern has a cause. And I was alone on a highway in West Texas at 10 at night, and whatever the cause was, it was somewhere out there in the dark, around me, and I didn't know what it wanted. I don't know when I stopped seeing it. Somewhere past a cluster of unmarked county roads that branch off 287 heading north and south into ranchland, the pattern broke. I didn't see it a 4th time. Maybe whatever it was took one of those county roads. Maybe it had been out there the whole time and I just stopped being able to find it in the dark. I drove the last 2 hours into Lubbock without stopping, not even for gas, even though I was running lower than I was comfortable with. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to be still on that road for any reason. I got to my cousin's place close to midnight and sat in his driveway for a few minutes before I went inside, just sitting there with the engine off in a lit neighborhood with houses on either side, feeling the particular relief of ordinary things. A porch light, a dog barking somewhere, the sound of a television from inside. I showed my cousin the photo the next morning. He looked at it for a long time. He said it looked like a late 80s Buick, maybe a LeSabre, and that it looked empty. and that the door being open like that on a car, with no one around it, was strange. He didn't have an explanation. I looked up Route 287 and that stretch of West Texas highway over the following weeks, searched for anything that might explain what I'd seen. A story, a name, a history, a pattern of incidents that someone else had reported. I found nothing useful. I found other people's accounts of strange things on long, empty Texas roads, which is its own category of internet rabbit hole, but nothing that matched specifically what I'd seen or explained the mechanics of it. I still have the photo. I've gone back to it maybe 15 or 20 times over the past 3 years, looking at it in different light, zooming in on the parts I can make out clearly. Old car, open door, empty road. Every time I look at it, I notice the same thing, and every time it bothers me the same amount, which is this. The door is open at an angle that suggests it was opened from the inside and then just left. Not blown open by wind. The angle is wrong for that. Too deliberate, too controlled. Opened by someone who got out and walked away from the car and didn't come back. Or opened by someone who was waiting inside and stepped out when they heard something coming. I don't know which of those is the right reading. I'm not sure there's a way to know from a photograph taken at night from 40 feet through a dirty windshield. But I think about it. I think about stopping on that empty highway and sitting there for 2 full minutes in my headlights, looking directly at that car, and nothing came out of it, and nothing moved, and nothing happened. And I've thought about that enough times now that I've started to wonder whether the reason nothing came out was because whatever was there didn't need to, whether the point wasn't the car at all, whether the point was me, stopped on the side of the road, engine running, door locked, staring, and whether somewhere in the dark, past the reach of my headlights, something was looking back. I was 29 when this happened. I'd been driving back from a job interview in Dallas and had taken a smaller state highway instead of the interstate because my GPS said it was 40 minutes faster. It was late August, around 11 at night, and the heat was still sitting heavy even after dark, the way it does in Texas in summer. And I had my windows down because my AC had been making a sound I didn't trust on long drives. The highway was called FM 2623, and I'd never been on it before. It was 2 lanes, no shoulder worth mentioning, with mesquite and cedar on both sides, growing close enough to the road that my headlights hit the branches instead of the distance. Not the kind of road that feels friendly at night. Not the kind of road where you expect to see other cars. And for the first 40 minutes, I didn't. I had maybe 50 miles left to the small city where I was staying with a friend. My phone was at 11%, and I was tired in that specific way you get tired after an interview. Not physical tiredness, but the kind that comes from performing yourself for 4 hours straight. I wasn't fully paying attention. I think about that a lot now. The gas station appeared around a long bend, one of those old standalone stations with 2 pumps under a canopy, and a small cinder block building with 1 lit window and an open sign in red neon that was missing the E, so it just said OPN. I was at a quarter tank, and my phone was dying, and I figured I'd stop, fill up, charge my phone for 10 minutes on the car charger while I used the bathroom. Normal stop, completely ordinary reasons. I pulled in and parked at the nearer pump and got out, and that's when I noticed the other car. It was parked on the far side of the building, mostly in shadow, pulled up close to the cinder block wall, the way you'd park if you didn't want your car visible from the road. Dark-colored SUV, older model. No plates on the back that I could see from where I stood. I noticed it and told myself it was probably the attendant's car, that employees at rural gas stations often park around the side or behind the building, and that the no plates thing was probably just dirty or missing and not something to read into. I told myself that, and I mostly believed it, and I started the pump and went inside to find the bathroom. The inside was small and bright in that particular way of old rural gas stations. Fluorescent tubes overhead, a few shelves of road snacks, a glass front cooler along one wall, a counter with a register, and a small television on a shelf behind it. showing a local news channel with the volume low. The man behind the counter was somewhere in his 40s, thin, dark hair, wearing a button-down shirt that seemed too formal for where he was. He looked up when I came in and smiled and asked if I was getting gas. I said I was, pumped 2, and asked where the restroom was. He pointed to a door at the back without saying anything else and went back to watching the television. I used the bathroom and came back out and grabbed a water from the cooler and brought it to the counter. While he was ringing it up, I mentioned that I was coming from Dallas and asked if the highway I was on went straight through to where I was headed. He said it did, but that there was a stretch about 15 miles ahead where the road got narrow and I should slow down through it. Normal thing to say, helpful. I thanked him and took my water and went back outside. My phone was at 9% now. It had dropped while I was inside, not charged, because I'd forgotten to plug it in before I went in. I plugged it in now and stood next to my car while the pump ran and drank my water and looked at the road in both directions. Nothing coming either way, just the dark and the insects and the sound of the pump clicking through gallons. I was almost done pumping when I heard a sound from the side of the building. Not loud, more like a footstep on gravel. One single step, and then nothing. I looked over. The shadow on the far side of the building was deep enough that I couldn't see anything clearly. The dark SUV was still parked there. I told myself it was an animal, a dog or a raccoon, or something that lived in the brush and came around at night when it smelled food and garbage. That's common at rural stations. I told myself that, and I watched the shadow for a moment, and nothing moved, and the pump clicked off, and I hung up the nozzle and got back in my car. I was reaching for my seatbelt when I looked up and saw him in my rearview mirror. He was standing at the back of my car, maybe 6 feet behind my bumper, just standing there in the cone of red light from my taillights. I don't remember exactly how long I sat there before I processed what I was looking at. It felt like a long time, but it was probably 3 or 4 seconds. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes, and he was completely still, not walking toward me, not walking away, not doing anything at all, just standing there, looking at my car, or at me through the rear window. I couldn't tell which because I couldn't see his face clearly in the red light, just the shape of him and the stillness of him, and the fact that he was right there and I hadn't heard him approach. I locked my doors. The sound of the locks was very loud in the car. I put the car in drive and I pulled forward away from the pump and turned toward the exit, and I checked my mirror as I turned. He hadn't moved. He was still standing in the same spot, still facing my direction, watching me pull away. I got back onto FM 2623 and accelerated, and within 30 seconds the gas station was gone behind me, and I was back in the dark, between the mesquite trees with my windows still down and the night air coming in, and my heart doing something I could feel in my throat. I tried to settle myself down over the next several miles. I told myself he was probably just another customer who'd pulled around from the back and walked to the pumps and happened to be standing near my car when I looked up. I told myself the stillness was just someone who was tired and moving slowly, someone who had nothing to do with me. I tried to make the picture look innocent, and I almost could, except for one thing I couldn't get past no matter how I arranged it. There had been no other car at the pumps, no car anywhere in the front of the station when I pulled in except mine. So either he'd been inside the station when I was, which meant I'd somehow missed another person in a room roughly the size of a one-car garage, or he'd been on the side of the building the whole time, next to that dark SUV in the shadow, and had walked around to stand behind my car while I was inside using the bathroom, and didn't come out or announce himself, or do anything a person with ordinary intentions would do. He just waited there until I came back out, and then he stood behind my car and waited some more. My phone had gotten to 14% by then, and I called my friend and told him what had happened and asked him to stay on the line with me. He did. We talked for the next 30 miles about nothing important. His job, a show he was watching, whether I wanted him to order food before I got there, and I kept my speed at 70 and watched my mirrors and didn't see headlights behind me the whole way. I got to his place just past midnight and sat in his driveway for a minute before I went in, the same way I imagine most people sit for a minute after something like that, just letting the ordinary world come back into focus around them. I've thought about the man behind the counter too, since then, the way he pointed me to the bathroom without much conversation, the way he seemed unsurprised to see me, and equally unsurprised when I left. I don't know if he knew the man outside was there. I don't know if this was something that happened at that station with some regularity, someone waiting in the shadows at the side of the building, while an attendant directed lone travelers to the back of the building, to a room with one door. I don't know if I'm constructing something from pieces that don't actually connect. Maybe the attendant was just a quiet man, and the person outside was just a stranger, and none of it was coordinated, and I drove away from something that was never going to become anything. I've tried to believe that. Some nights I can. I looked up FM 2623 after I got home and found the general area on a map and tried to identify the station, but I couldn't place it exactly. I don't remember enough about the mile markers, and I didn't note the name of the station if it had one. I've driven a lot of rural Texas roads, and they start to resemble each other in memory after a while, especially at night. I filed the whole thing somewhere in the back of my head, under unresolved, which is where it's been living for the past 2 years. What I keep coming back to is the stillness, not the surprise of seeing him there, not the fear of it exactly, but the quality of how he was standing, like someone who had been there for a while, like someone who was used to waiting, like someone who had done this before and knew how to be patient about it. The pump had run for maybe 4 or 5 minutes. He could have been standing behind my car for all of that, watching the back of my head through the rear window while I stood outside, drinking my water and looking at the road and thinking about nothing and feeling completely alone, in the way you feel alone on a quiet night, in an empty place when you don't yet know that you aren't.